The twin suns of Zethera Prime rose over a world that shimmered like glass and steel, its skies streaked with violet clouds and the glow of distant starships. At the heart of the capital stood the Imperial Palace, a massive tower carved from living crystal, wrapped in a halo of energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. Inside its halls, guards in obsidian armor stood in silent rows, terrified of the woman who ruled them all, Queen Zevra of the Virulon Empire. Her word was law, her gaze sharper than any blade, and her enemies feared her name across the stars. Yet on this morning, the mighty queen faced a battle even she could not win, her own children. The royal nursery echoed with shrieks, crashes, and bursts of wild energy. Floating toys spun in mid-air before exploding into glittering shards. The walls, once painted in golden light, were scorched black by plasma bursts. The youngest hatchlings, twin daughters with bright silver scales and large crimson eyes, giggled as they levitated furniture, slamming it against the ceiling. Their older brother, barely in his teens, sat in the corner carving deep marks into the metal floor with his claws, pretending not to hear his sister's laughter. The queen stood in the doorway, her cape trailing behind her, her sharp crown glinting in the light. Her expression was not one of royal calm. It was pure exhaustion. Before her, another nanny, the 15th in 2 months, knelt trembling on the floor. Her armor was dented, her voice shaking as she cried out, "Your Majesty, I cannot control them. They are monsters." The queen's wings twitched. "They are children," she hissed. But even she sounded unconvinced. The nanny dropped her staff, backed away, and fled the room, shouting that no living being could survive such torment. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, and silence filled the nursery for the first time in hours. Queen Zevra turned to her children, her voice icy. "You have embarrassed me before the court again. What am I to do with you?" The twins pouted. "We only played," one said. The boy didn't look up. "Maybe if you stayed with us instead of holding meetings all day," he muttered. The queen froze. For a moment the iron wall around her heart cracked, but she quickly turned and swept from the room, her long tail flicking in frustration. She was a ruler, a commander of fleets, not a caretaker. She had lost her mate years ago in battle and had ruled ever since with an iron will, but no amount of discipline, no level of technology could make her children behave. Later that day, deep beneath the shining upper halls of the palace, Ethan Cole pushed his cleaning cart through a dim corridor. He was human. One of the few, allowed within the Virulon Empire, working as a janitor under strict conditions. He wore a faded blue uniform stained with oil and ash, and a small hollow badge that read, Maintenance Technician Class 3. His brown hair was streaked with gray, and his eyes carried the weight of years. He had once been a soldier on Earth. Before the wars, before the sickness that took his wife and left him raising a daughter alone, when Earth had fallen into debt under alien control, he'd taken the only job that could pay for his daughter's medical treatments, janitorial work on an alien world. Ethan didn't complain. He worked quietly, fixed what was broken, and kept to the shadows. The other workers often mocked him. "A human janitor in the Queen's palace," they sneered. "How low your kind has fallen." He ignored them. He didn't care what they thought. He had one goal, to keep sending credits home. That afternoon, as he walked the upper levels to fix a malfunctioning cleaning drone, the palace shook with a thunderous crash. Screams echoed down the corridor, followed by a wave of smoke. The drone whirred nervously and flew into the wall, short-circuiting. Ethan sighed, picked up his toolkit, and followed the sound. It led him straight to the royal nursery, a place no low-level worker should ever enter. The doors were slightly open. Inside, chaos reigned again. Shattered furniture floated mid-air, holographic walls flickered with static, and sparks rained down from the ceiling. 3 small shapes moved through the smoke. The royal children. They were laughing, their eyes glowing with power, unaware of the danger. A huge crystal beam had cracked and was about to collapse over them. Ethan didn't think. He ran inside. With a shout, he grabbed a support pole from his cart and shoved it under the falling beam just before it crushed the twins. Dust and energy sparks filled the air. The children froze, staring at him in shock. Ethan coughed, wiping soot from his face. "You kids okay?" he asked. None of them answered. The boy hissed softly. "You're human. You're not supposed to be here." Ethan glanced at the wrecked room and shrugged. "Yeah, well, someone's got to clean this up before your mom finds out." For the first time in weeks, the twins giggled instead of screamed. The older boy glared, but curiosity flickered in his eyes. Ethan looked around at the chaos and let out a long sigh. "All right," he said, picking up a broom. "If you three help me, we can finish faster." The hatchlings looked confused. "Help?" one asked. "No one ever asks us to help." Ethan smiled tiredly. "There's a first time for everything." Slowly, awkwardly, the children began to pick up broken pieces of toys. Ethan showed them how to sweep, how to stack things neatly, how to work together instead of fighting. When one of the twins started levitating the broom to make it fly, he laughed. "That's cheating," he said. "Try using your hands, feels better." The children stared at their small claws, then laughed again and did as he said. Hours passed, and the nursery became calm for the first time in months. Ethan repaired. The broken wall panels hummed a soft earth tune and told them stories about a little girl back home who loved stars and rain. The children listened quietly. They had never heard such simple things. Stories about bedtime, about laughter, about love. When they grew tired, he tucked them into their glowing sleep pods and dimmed the lights. The twins fell asleep first, their small tails curled around each other. The boy tried to stay awake but drifted off as Ethan hummed. When Queen Zevra arrived, expecting another disaster, she found the nursery in perfect order. The broken walls were mended, the air was calm, and her children were asleep. She stopped at the doorway, her eyes wide with disbelief. The human janitor stood beside the sleeping pods, holding a mop like a staff, humming softly to himself. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice, low and sharp, cut through the silence. "Who are you?" Ethan turned, startled, and bowed awkwardly. Ethan Cole, ma'am. Maintenance crew." The door was open and things looked bad. Her eyes narrowed. "You entered the royal nursery without permission?" "Yes, ma'am. But your kids were in danger. Couldn't just walk away." The queen studied him. This thin, weary creature with rough hands and honest eyes. He didn't tremble or grovel like the others. He spoke simply, like someone who didn't care for titles or threats. Something about his calm unsettled her. "And they listened to you?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "They're good kids, just lonely, I think." Zevra's lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever called her children good before. She looked at their sleeping faces, peaceful for once, and felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. She looked back at Ethan. "You may go," she said softly, though her tone lacked its usual command. Ethan hesitated. "With respect, ma'am, someone should check the ceiling supports in here. One more quake and it could fall again." The queen blinked, surprised that he was still thinking about their safety. Finally, she nodded. "See to it." As he left, the guards whispered in confusion, staring at the human who had managed to do what no warrior, no scholar, and no royal attendant could: calm the heirs of the Viralan Empire. The queen remained, by the nursery door long after he was gone, watching her children sleep and wondering who this strange human was. This man who spoke softly, worked quietly, and yet carried the calm of a mountain in the middle of a storm. That night, for the first time in months, the palace was silent. The queen sat by the great crystal window, the twin moons shining on her crown, and she found herself thinking about the janitor from Earth, a creature from a weak, broken world, yet one who had walked into chaos and brought peace with nothing but patience and a kind heart. She did not yet know his story, nor the storm that would soon engulf them all, but deep down, she sensed that something had changed. And somewhere in the quiet halls of the palace, Ethan Cole mopped the floors, humming to himself, unaware that his simple act of kindness had just rewritten the fate of an empire. The weeks after that strange night changed everything. inside the great palace of Zithera Prime. Word spread through every shining corridor and every whispering servant hall that the impossible had happened. The human janitor had done what no one else could. The royal heirs of the Virelon Empire, once wild and untamable, now listened to Ethan Cole. The twins giggled whenever they saw him, their silver scales glimmering in delight, and the young prince, once full of anger and arrogance, followed Ethan's quiet instructions like a soldier obeying his commander. The queen watched all this with suspicion at first, unable to believe that a creature from a small forgotten planet like Earth could succeed where her best-trained caretakers had failed. She had spent years ruling through fear and order, through punishment and reward, but this man used none of those things. He spoke softly with patience, and somehow the children responded. She often stood at the edge of the nursery door, watching unseen as Ethan taught the twins how to play without breaking things, or told them stories of oceans and sunsets on Earth. His stories were simple, about laughter, about hope, about how people cared for each other even when life was hard. The queen had never heard words like that spoken so plainly. Virelons did not speak of love. They spoke of honor, victory, and strength. Yet something in those quiet moments made her wonder if strength meant something different to humans. One morning, while Ethan was repairing a broken hollow lamp near the nursery, the palace lights flickered. A deep, low hum filled the air, the kind of sound that made the bones tremble. He looked up as the power systems shuddered, and through the window he saw strange red flashes in the sky. It was not lightning, it was weapons fire. The alarm sirens began to scream through every level of the palace. Soldiers in black armor rushed down the halls shouting orders. Ethan didn't need to ask what was happening. He had heard enough whispers during his cleaning rounds to know the queen's enemies were many. And now, one of them had come for her. Up in the command tower, Queen Zevra stood before a floating hologram of her fleet. Her face was carved from steel, but even her calm began to crack as she saw what approached. A massive armada of warships marked with the jagged insignia of the Zorlak Dominion filled the upper atmosphere. The Zorlaks were not just rivals. They were monsters of metal and rage, a species bred for war, towering beasts covered in armor that grew from their own skin. They had been quiet for decades, licking their wounds after their last defeat. Now they were back, stronger and more vengeful than ever. Their leader had vowed to erase the Virelon bloodline and claim the throne world as his own. The first energy blast hit the defense grid like a thunderclap. Towers exploded and the sky over the capital turned to fire. Ethan didn't think twice. He grabbed his comm unit and shouted into it, trying to reach any officer who would listen. "This is Ethan Cole, maintenance level 5. The royal nursery is unsecured. Repeat, the heirs are in danger." Static filled his ear. No one answered. The next blast threw him off his feet as part of the ceiling collapsed. Dust and smoke filled the corridor. He pushed himself up and ran toward the nursery. The door was sealed, emergency lights flashing red, but he forced it open with a maintenance override code he had memorized long ago. Inside, the children were crying, frightened by the shaking walls and the booming explosions above. Ethan rushed to them, pulling the twins close and shouting over the noise, "It's okay, I've got you. We're going to be fine." Another explosion ripped through the upper floors and a section of the ceiling cracked, sending chunks of glowing crystal falling toward them. Ethan covered the children with his body, pain shooting through his back as debris hit him. He gritted his teeth and held them close until the rumbling stopped. Then he looked up, coughing from the dust. "All right," he said, forcing a shaky smile. "Adventure time's over. Let's move." He guided them out of the nursery, dodging sparks and collapsing beams, heading for the lower corridors that led to the shelter levels. Halfway down the hall, a squad of royal guards appeared, weapons ready, followed by the queen herself, wearing black battle armor etched with silver lines of light. Her crown had transformed into a combat helm. Her wings extended in a shimmer of energy. When she saw Ethan holding her children, her expression flickered between relief and disbelief. "You stayed?" she asked, her voice breaking for the first time. Ethan looked at her like she had asked a ridiculous question. "Of course I stayed," he said. "They needed me." Another explosion rocked the palace and the queen snapped back into command. "The Zorlaks have breached orbit," she said sharply. "They are targeting the palace. We must reach the central bunker." She turned to her guards. "Protect them with your lives." But Ethan stepped forward, wiping blood from his forehead. Your Majesty, that's not going to hold them. If they've got a ship that big out there, they're not here to capture. They're here to wipe this place clean. The Queen frowned. You know warfare? Ethan nodded grimly. I used to, a long time ago. That night, as the battle raged outside, the palace became a fortress. The Queen led her soldiers into the upper halls, while Ethan stayed near the command center with the children and a handful of guards. When the outer shields failed, the sky burned red as Zorlak landing ships tore through the clouds. The enemy poured into the city, huge and relentless, their footsteps shaking the ground. Ethan could see the glow of their plasma cannons through the windows. The guards were terrified but held their ground. He quickly scanned the power readings on a nearby terminal and had an idea. If we reroute power from the service grid to the internal turrets, we can double their output, he said. A Varellan officer hesitated. That would overload the generators. Ethan grinned. Yes, sir, but it'll fry them before it fries us. With a few quick commands, he redirected the circuits, his hands moving faster than anyone expected from a janitor. The turrets along the palace walls came alive, spraying arcs of plasma into the sky. Dozens of Zorlak dropships exploded mid-air, and for a moment the defenders began to hope. The Queen, fighting on the upper balcony, saw the tide turn and shouted into her comm. Who activated the secondary defense grid? The answer came faint and human. Just some janitor. She smiled despite herself, but the victory was short. A shadow fell across the sky. The Zorlak flagship, a monster of black metal shaped like a skull, drifting closer to the planet. Its main cannon began to charge, glowing with crimson light. The Queen's command screen lit up with warnings. If it fires, the entire capital will be gone, she said through clenched teeth. Her advisors begged her to evacuate, but she shook her head. I will not abandon my world. Ethan, still in the control hall, saw the readings too. His mind raced. The flagship's shields were too strong to be broken from below. Only a direct strike from inside could stop it. He looked at the Queen through the flickering holoscreen. There's one way, he said. Let me take a shuttle. I can get inside that ship. I used to work maintenance on Varellan cruisers. I know where their cores are weakest. She stared at him as if he had lost his mind. You're a janitor, she said slowly. You are not a soldier. Ethan met her gaze. No, ma'am. I'm a father, and I've got something worth fighting for. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the Queen gave a small, sharp nod. Very well, she said quietly. Go. The guards protested, but she silenced them with a single gesture. She watched as Ethan ran toward the hangar, his uniform torn, his steps steady. When he disappeared into the smoke, she turned back to the battlefield, her heart pounding with something she could not name. Outside, the night was alive with fire. The human janitor climbed into a small assault shuttle, one barely holding together from previous fights. He took a deep breath, thought of his daughter back on Earth, and pushed the thrusters to full power. The shuttle roared into the sky, weaving through burning debris and streaks of plasma fire, heading straight toward the heart of the Zorlak fleet. Every eye in the palace followed that tiny spark of light as it rose through the storm. Even the Queen, hardened by war and grief, whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken in years, for the fragile, stubborn human who refused to run and who had somehow become the hope of her entire world. The night sky over Zythera Prime was a storm of fire and smoke as Ethan Cole's small shuttle tore through the chaos. Below him, the capital burned, and above him, the Zorlak flagship hung like a dark moon, its surface crawling with weapons that glowed blood red. He could feel the shuttle shuddering under the strain. The engines were old, and every piece of metal screamed as he pushed it harder. The Queen's voice crackled faintly through the comm, warning him that the enemy had locked onto his signal, but he didn't slow down. He knew there was no going back. He wasn't a pilot, not really, but years of fixing ships and patching old engines had taught him how they worked, and desperation was its own kind of fuel. The ship jolted as a plasma bolt grazed the hull, the heat searing through the cabin. Not yet, he muttered to himself, gripping the controls. Just hold together a little longer. His heart pounded as the flagship grew larger, filling the viewport until it blocked out the stars. He aimed straight for a maintenance port near the underside of the warship. Every design, even alien ones, had a weak spot, and this was his only chance. The shuttle slammed into the docking bay with a crash that shook his bones. The impact threw him against the harness, knocking the breath from his chest. Sparks flew across the console as alarm screamed. He unbuckled, grabbed the plasma cutter and the small pack of explosives he had taken from the palace armory, and kicked open the hatch. The air was cold and smelled of metal and smoke. The docking bay was dim, lit only by flickering red lights, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from somewhere beyond. Ethan moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. He had learned how to move quietly during his years cleaning the endless halls of the palace. Funny how even the smallest habits could save your life in a war. He crept along the corridor, past crates of weapons and armor that looked far too big for any human to wear. Then he heard the sound of guttural voices, deep and growling, coming closer. 2 Zorlak guards rounded the corner, their bodies encased in bone-like armor, each carrying a staff that pulsed with crimson energy. They hadn't seen him yet. Ethan glanced around, spotted a broken panel on the wall, and ducked behind it. As they passed, he rose silently and drove his plasma cutter into the back of one guard's neck. The creature roared, twisting in pain, and the second spun around, raising its weapon, but Ethan slammed a wrench into its chest with all his strength. The blow barely staggered it, but it gave him enough time to grab the guard's fallen staff and pull the trigger. A blast of red light tore through the alien's torso, dropping it instantly. Ethan stood still for a moment, breathing hard, his hands shaking. He had fought before, long ago, but this was different. Back then he fought to survive. Now he fought for others. He pressed forward, deeper into the ship, guided by the faint blue light of his portable scanner. The readings showed he was getting close to the energy core, the heart of the ship, the place he needed to plant the charges. The deeper he went, the hotter the air became. He could hear the hum of the power conduits vibrating through the metal walls, a sound like a living creature breathing in the dark. He turned a corner and froze. Ahead, a massive chamber opened up, glowing with crimson light. In the center hung the core, a huge sphere of swirling plasma suspended in midair, surrounded by pillars that crackled with energy. It was beautiful and terrifying at once, but standing before it was a monster. The Zorlak warlord was easily twice the height of any human, his body covered in dark armor that seemed to grow from his skin. His eyes glowed like coals, and his voice rumbled through the room like thunder. "A human," he said slowly, his mouth twisting in disgust. "You think you can challenge the Dominion?" Ethan gripped the plasma cutter tighter, his pulse racing. "Not challenge," he said. "Just clean up the mess." The warlord laughed, a deep, echoing sound that shook the walls. "You are brave but foolish. I will crush you and feed your ashes to my soldiers." The warlord lunged, moving faster than something his size should. Ethan barely dodged as a massive clawed hand slammed into the floor, tearing up metal. He rolled, grabbed one of the explosive packs, and hurled it toward the core. The warlord struck him across the chest before it landed, sending him crashing into a wall. Pain exploded through his ribs and his vision blurred, but he saw the charge stick to the pillar and arm itself. He coughed, dragging himself up. "You'll have to hit harder than that," he muttered. The alien roared and swung again, but Ethan ducked low, rolling between its legs. He sliced upward with the plasma cutter, carving into the creature's armor. It howled, spinning around and slamming its fist into Ethan's side. The impact sent him sprawling, his body screaming in pain. His cutter fell from his hand and skidded across the floor. The warlord advanced, each step shaking the deck. "Your world is dust," he growled. "Your kind is weak." Ethan forced himself to his knees, blood trickling down his face. "Yeah," he gasped. "Maybe, but we don't quit." As the alien raised its weapon for the final blow, Ethan lunged forward, grabbing the plasma cutter and driving it straight into the warlord's chest. The blade burned through armor and flesh, lighting the chamber in a blinding flash. The warlord screamed, staggering back, and Ethan slammed his hand down on the detonator. "Cleanup's done," he whispered. The last thing he saw before everything went white was the energy core exploding in a burst of light that swallowed the ship whole. From the surface of Zethera Prime, the Queen and her soldiers watched as the sky ignited. The enormous flagship broke apart, glowing red as its fragments burned in the atmosphere. The Zorlak fleet faltered, their coordination lost without their leader. One by one, the enemy ships fell or retreated into the void. The Queen stood in silence, her armor scorched and her face streaked with ash. Around her, the city burned, but the war was ending. Her children clung to her cloak, staring at the glowing trails of fire above. "Is he gone?" one of the twins whispered. The Queen's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She simply placed her hands on their shoulders and turned them away from the sky. Days passed. The fires were put out, the dead were buried, and the palace began to rebuild. The queen worked without rest, commanding repairs, comforting her people, and pretending not to feel the emptiness that had settled in her chest. But then one morning, as dawn broke over the horizon, a small alert blinked on the palace sensors. A crash had been detected on the edge of the capital, near the ruins of the outer gardens. Soldiers rushed to investigate, and when they arrived, they found a battered escape pod half buried in the ash. The hatch hissed open with a weak burst of steam, and out stepped a man, limping, covered in burns and soot, his uniform torn beyond recognition. In his arms, wrapped in a piece of his jacket, was the youngest of the royal hatchlings, who had followed him into the shuttle at the last second. Ethan staggered forward a few steps, blinking against the bright sunlight. He looked half dead, his face pale and his body trembling, but when he saw the queen running toward him through the dust, he smiled faintly. "Told you I'd keep them safe," he said hoarsely. She stopped in front of him, her crown cracked, her eyes wide with disbelief and relief all at once. "You survived," she whispered. He gave a weak shrug. "Had a promise to keep." The queen took the child gently from his arms, her claws shaking. Then she looked at him, the human janitor who had saved her empire, and for the first time in her reign she bowed. "Ethan Cole of Earth," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You have the heart of a warrior and the soul of a father." When the reconstruction of Zythera Prime was complete, the queen ordered a new hall to be built in the palace, made of clear crystal and silver. At its center stood a tall pillar engraved with human and Viralan script side by side. The inscription read, "To the human who cleaned our hearts and saved our world." Ethan was offered riches and titles, but he refused them all, asking only for passage back to Earth to see his daughter. Before he left, the queen stood with him at the landing pad. "You changed more than you know," she said quietly. Ethan smiled, looking out at the stars. "Sometimes," he said, "you just have to show people how to clean up their own mess." He saluted her, climbed aboard the shuttle, and disappeared into the deep blue of the sky. The queen watched until the light faded, then turned back to her children who stood beside her, stronger, calmer, wiser. They would grow to rule one day with both strength and compassion, for they had learned from the strangest teacher imaginable, a human janitor from a distant, broken world who had taught them what true courage looked like. And on every anniversary of that day, the people of Zythera Prime looked to the heavens and remembered the man who had come from the stars, not to conquer or to serve, but simply to care, and in doing so had saved them all.